involved in a... actually, we are making up what we lost back in February, or was it February or March? Because I repeat myself from last time, but that is the time when the new and really very informative and very beautiful edition, translation of Artemidorus' book on dreams, on his book, the Oneirocritica in Greek, the interpretation of Greeks, was published, and so we were going to have a grand old time with that book and with the subject. So we managed to have one meeting, and then we were closed down. So I thought that we pick up a little bit on it this time again, and we had sort of the introductory part last time, and we need to keep in mind that, which is, I'm sure, something that we mentioned last time, that pretty much throughout the known history of human cultures, people considered dreams important. Now, the actual rational importance that they attributed to the dreams may have varied in character depending on the historical period. For a very long time in the really the ancient world, by which I mean ancient Egypt, Babylon, things of that sort, and also in ancient India. So the dreams were predominantly considered to be of a predictive nature. So, and in many cultures that is still the case. I had many years ago, I had many Armenian friends. Some of them quite young people, grew up in this country already, but when they had a dream, they always wanted to find out what it meant in terms of what is going to happen in the future. And I said, that's maybe not quite the right way of looking at the situation, because in an indirect way that may be true, what is trying to come through to the person in the dream may be powerful enough in the mind, in the psyche, to try to influence one's life in a particular direction. But the dream is not primarily a predictive device, and if we consider it such, then we may be just really barking up the wrong tree of life, to use a Kabbalistic metaphor, partly Kabbalistic metaphor. So that was a very frequent way in which dreams were approached. But you have to have sympathy for the ancient people, whichever period we look at, because here is a frequent phenomenon of life, depending on various conditions, one's age, one's life cycle, various things, but dreams are very, very present and very powerful. And I often sort of imagined as to what may have happened, or I don't know, in the days of the cavemen, and I dare say cave women, otherwise they wouldn't have continued in the cave, when one of their prominent members, say, woke up in the morning and had a very vivid dream. So he gathered the people together, and this is, of course, our retrojected imagination, and I said, guys, it's very strange. I seems like I took a big trip. I was over there beyond the mountains over there, and I had to get away from the saber-toothed tiger and this and that, and I was talking to the members of other tribes there, and now I'm back here, and his people looked at him, but come on, you were here snoring all night long, you didn't go anywhere, you know. And says, how can that be? It was so vivid. I can just remember every detail. Well, you were here as far as we are concerned. We saw you and we heard you. And so the dream, I would say, going back probably to very archaic times, very primitive times, the dream was a puzzle. And the dream is still a puzzle. But we turned the puzzle in different ways. And certainly then one of them was that the dream, and very, very seldom, yes, there can be indications, again in a more indirect way, about the future. But it's not primarily a prophetic device either. But let's say the dream is still a puzzle. It is still a mysterious thing, and it continued as such. Now, when we come to a later period, well, let's say really much more exciting culture, the Alexandrian period, which sort of from a couple of hundred years BC until a couple of hundred years AD, and primarily centered in Alexandria, in Egypt, the interest in dreams were again very, very great. But here the emphasis is on something else, which seemingly always comes up in every spiritual upheaval, every New Age movement, namely healing. So when you're sick, you dream something, and maybe you will dream something that will be of assistance in healing you. And now we are coming a little bit closer to, well, I don't know, maybe some of you are vegetarians. So we are coming a little closer to the meat of the subject, you see, because there is a connection, and since the year 1900, since the days of Sigmund Freud in Vienna, let's say it has become more and more a matter of acceptance that there is such a thing as a psychosomatic realm of experience, and that some of our afflictions, even physicals, soma is the body, may have a connection with the psyche, and that therefore ailments as well as the cure of the ailments often might come from from dealing with the interaction of these two, namely psyche and soma. So we are coming a little closer to what eventually becomes the modern view of these things. And then, of course, and I mentioned that last time, and perhaps with the paucity of time that we have now, I shouldn't engage in too much repetition, that to my knowledge, and I have always loved history, and I still do, the only period of any length wherein dreams were not considered important by the culture was in the 19th century, which Carl Jung called the true dark ages, when the German term originated, Träume sind Schäume, dreams are just so many bubbles, so much foam, and when dreams, along with other manifestations of psyche, were just not considered important. However, that changed, at least for a considerable time. Now I think we have seen a retrogressive movement in the culture again for the last few decades, namely that with the coming of Sigmund Freud, the relationship, the vital relationship of the inner being, of the inner man, inner woman, to the dream came to be discovered. Because Freud developed his own ways. He originally employed with a partner of his by the name of Broiler, hypnotic techniques to investigate what's going on inside a person. But then his partner took off, his physician partner, and Dr. Freud discovered that he didn't know how to hypnotize. He always depended on the other doctor to do the hypnosis. So now, what am I going to do? Where am I going? Moreover, probably, where am I going to get my income? And so he came upon the idea, which turned out to be very correct, that he could accomplish by way of the interpretation of dreams the same thing, or maybe even better, than he previously could accomplish through hypnosis. And so, for the first time, here was somebody, and he gathered disciples who recognized once again that the dream is important. And this pretty much, this attention to the dream and to the inner psyche, the so-called, which he called the unconscious, das Unbewusste in German, endured pretty much for 100 years. Now, I know that particularly in medical psychiatry, which is a tautology, it's the same meaning twice, because a psychiatrist is a medical man. A psychologist may not be. But in any event, particularly in the medical psychology, somehow the dream began to lose its value once again. And now if any people go to a psychiatrist or maybe even to a psychologist, psychotherapist, the chances are that what they will be given will be not the meaning of a dream, but a pill, or two, or three, So the doctors have very largely become pill pushers. And I am the last one to put down a good pill, because there are many, many things for which medical chemistry has been important. But so there has been a little change there again. But once again, now, if my interpretation of the data is correct, I think I would feel justified in saying that we have been moving sort of from the outside to the almost out, and the almost outside eventually to the inside of the human, and recognize that that's where the dream is really important, to the extent that it is still recognized. And here there is a very, very important term, concept, whatever we want to call it, and that is meaning. What Freud discovered, and of course all the other depth psychological schools, Jungian, Adlerian, you name it, all shared, was that the dream conveys meaning. And you might say that this is what the ancients have been looking for. Well, it says, why did somebody get sick? So let's find out what the causes of his illness are, and perhaps then we maybe deduce the cure. But it all has to do with meaning. And so I think now, with the discovery of what commonly has been called the unconscious, we have moved to the discovery of meaning again. Now, I need to throw in, especially in view of the fact that I think I mentioned one cute story that the participants of which were known to me when I was a child. I was the Hungarian lady who dreamt a lot about a particular place, and then eventually she found out that her semblance, her whatever you want to call it, her ghost, appeared at that place pretty much every time she dreamt about it. Very rare case. But these were very, very truthful people. So in any event, there may be occasions like that, but even there, one needs to ask, all right, if that sort of thing happened, and it can happen to you when you're awake. I don't consider myself a psychic, but let's say a number of times in my life, a live person who was thinking of me in a pretty powerful fashion would appear in front of me, and his semblance. And I had to figure out, why am I seeing, for instance, Dr. Kuhn, my dear friend and teacher, Alvin Boyd Kuhn. One time I came back to my little apartment in the center of Hollywood, and it was one of these old-fashioned apartment houses where they have mailboxes and so forth, and I got my mail, and then I started walking to my apartment, and all of a sudden in front of me I see the full figure, very graphic, of my friend Dr. Kuhn. I thought, good God, why should that be? Now, meaning, again, what is the meaning of the apparition? And I said, I think he has sent me something that I haven't picked up. So I went back to the mailboxes. I didn't find anything, but I walked around on the corridor, and sure enough, there were 2 packages with books of Dr. Kuhn, because he was going to come to Los Angeles, and I was sort of his manager and his who sold his books and things. So he sent me the books. Aha, here it is. Now the meaning of the vision is right. Now, in the occult circles, particularly beginning with the latter part of the 19th century, which incidentally was also the time when Freud was beginning to move, and it was a very, very active, intellectually and spiritually active period. The occultists, on the basis of various statements made in different ancient books and traditions and so forth, came up with the idea of the astral body. Actually, I think the first one to use the term astral body, at least extensively, was Eliphas Levi. And it means the starry body. But this was then further and further elaborated and romanticized to the point where many people held that when they go to sleep and say dream, that means that their consciousness is traveling in another vehicle, astral vehicle. Well, again, it's an attempt to discover meaning in the nature of the dream. However, when Carl Jung, whom I very much respect, was confronted with the with the attempts to explain the dream as an experience in the astral body, he said that makes about as much sense as to explain the dream in terms of the dreamer having eaten a large portion of fried potatoes earlier on. Because I heard that said too, if you're going to eat this, whatever it was, don't eat so much because you're going to have wild dreams. Well, I could have wild dreams with or without eating. But in any event, that sort of thing. But once again, people were seeking for meaning. And that is an important issue, because what we are really hinting at here is that there is a hidden, deep-seated meaning. And just, it's not a meaning that this means that, but a revelation of something meaningful, of a meaningful process, which encompasses past, present, and future, that is within us. And that this meaning wants to come forth to our conscious mind, wants to be realized, wants to be processed, whatever you want to call it. It is asking, meaning is knocking at our door, asking us to let it in. And that this is a very, very important thing in connection with dreams. And that is the sort of thing that Jung, and before him Freud and various people were hinting at, that there is this so-called unconscious, as they called it, mind stuff within us which is not in the forefront of consciousness. In fact, it's not easy to bring it to the forefront of consciousness, but this stuff wants to be known, wants to come out, wants to amalgamate with our conscious selfhood. And for instance, when I forget how our time is shorter, but 1909, I'm not very good at dates of that sort. When I was young, I was much better with the other kind of date, if I may say so without bragging. In any event, but I think, I'm quite sure it was 1909 when Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, who was the main figure, and the Hungarian psychiatrist Sándor Ferenczi, the three of them, the unholy psychological trinity, got on a boat and came to America. And one of the places where they all went to was a lovely little, it's still there, sort of little medium-sized private university called Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. By happenstance, I have been there. I even stayed overnight, not at the university, but in Worcester. Nice place, if you go to New England. So they were giving lectures there. And Freud's lectures in Worcester became one of his most popular books. He spoke some English. Jung spoke better English, Freud did. And I think that his lectures were mostly translated from the German. And then when he came to his publisher, they were published, I think the book was called Introduction to Psychology. And there were some of the most lucid and enjoyable things that Sigmund Freud ever wrote. One time, for a couple of years, I earned my living by reading and digesting pretty much everything that Sigmund Freud wrote. That was my job. I was working for a writer, famous American historical novelist Irving Stone. So let's say I had to read a lot of Freud, and I really came to appreciate the old boy at that time. He was a very honest man. He had his faults, but who doesn't? And he was an excellent writer, very lucid writer, in German or even in translation, and that's seldom the case. In any event, the reason I brought up that book was that there he had a metaphoric story. He said, well, look, it's like this. Like you own a house, and you live in it, and you function in it in the daytime, but you're unaware that underneath the house, in the sort of the basement, there are a number of strange characters who hang out there, and they don't come up in the daytime for you to see them, but they sneak up at night. And he says, that is your unconscious. And that's where the complexes and whatever you wish to call them dwell. Now, at night time, when you are asleep, they come up. They traipse up the stairs. But at the same time, there is a night watchman or somebody who sits at the door of the stairs that come up. And when the night watchman sees them, he tells them, get the hell out of here, or its equivalent. I don't think Freud used that term. I won't let you into the house. So they go back down, and they dress up in various clothing that they find there and come back. And so maybe they are chased away a couple of times, but finally they manage to disguise themselves so well that they are let into the house. And so now here is, and they are the dream. Now, the disguise is that they have their own language, so to say. They have their own symbolism. If you take them literally, it's not going to work. So the dreams come from the unconscious, but they, in order to be admitted into consciousness, they have to disguise themselves. And so the dream interpreter, in this case psychological, you have to learn that symbolic language, otherwise you are not going to interpret the dream correctly. And that was the dream. That's why his first big book was The Interpretation of Dreams. And so now I started already last time, and I will continue with it a little now. Some of the categories into which Freud's vision of the dreams and the vision of Artemidorus of Dardis, who lived in the 2nd century AD, right in the Alexandrian period, and who felt that the method of dream interpretation which he employed was revealed to him by the god Apollo. So his book Oneirocritica has been available for some time, but and there have been interpretations of it. Now we have a much better one. But and I mentioned last time, and now I'll start with them again, maybe in greater detail, that the dreams may be classified in terms of their content, in their mass message, in several categories. And the first one is a dream which is really mundane. It has to do with the events as they occurred during the previous days. So if you remember a dream, and there are a lot of things in it that actually occurred during the last few days, maybe a week or so, you may be assured that it's of that sort of a nature. It is an attempt of the unconscious to, an attempt of the mind to understand and to utilize the content of the dream. And so I have sometimes likened that sort of a dream as a sort of psychic digestion. You are digesting what has happened because you're sorting it out and trying to. And then comes, of course, what Sigmund Freud was very fond of, the wish fulfillment dream. And Freud was so fond of that interpretation that, with all due respect to him, I feel that he went overboard. Because certainly there are wish fulfillment dreams, and there are dreams which maybe show that rather overtly, then there are others that show it in a more covert manner. But to say that all dreams, the dream is the fulfillment of a wish and nothing else. These are actual words of Sigmund Freud. But they just sort of indicate his tendency to be pretty dogmatic and pretty forthright. Let me see if Artemidorus, of course, has statements about all of these, and we will go through all of them. I think I have promised you at least one or two quotations. So let's see. Here, these are all from Onerocritica, the Greek work translated. Artemidorus said that not all dreams require interpretation. This is even a little earlier. Because not all dreams address themselves to such things that would require interpretation. But some dreams are simply the result of an irrational desire. This is the interpreter, Oxford professor Peter Tonneman, who writes this. Irrational desire, an inordinate fear, or, and then he says, a full or empty stomach. So we are back to our fried potatoes once again. But now here is what Artemidorus actually writes. For example, it is inevitable that in their dreams a lover will imagine himself with his beloved. Well, yeah, if possible. That someone frightened will have a vision of what frightens him. Then again, that a hungry man will dream of eating and a thirsty man of drinking. And for that matter, someone who has overstuffed himself will dream of choking or things of... I won't go into what else he's talking about. Because of the blockage caused by indigestion. We can see then that these dreams, where the feelings are pre-existent, obviously do not foretell the future, but they recollect the present. So this is where Artemidorus sort of comes closer and predicts Freud. Right now, what is it that you want but don't have? And you may dream about it, but you may dream about it in a disguised fashion. Now this also works into Freud's well, maybe a little bit again also excessive valuation of sexuality in a psychological sense, because you got to remember that Sigmund Freud, in his early years, and certainly not when he was old and had to leave because of the Nazis, but Sigmund Freud lived in a period of time in Vienna when things were going very well. There was no war, there was no revolution, people were pretty happy, and what do happy people do? They had sufficient money. What do happy people do when they don't have any worries? Well, they cultivate their love life as much as they can. After all, that's generally a pleasant thing to do, you know. And so Freud felt that there was a tremendous preoccupation psychologically of the populace in Vienna, for instance, with sex. But at the same time, you know, the church was still pretty powerful and all this sort of thing. And so it was not a polite thing to talk about sex, but it was still something that people thought a great deal. And so therefore, when sexual desires and sexual situations would come up in dreams, they would be disguised because of the aforementioned situation of the bombs coming up from the cellar. But that these disguises, so Freud felt, can be understood and can be interpreted, and then from there it can be found out what the person's preoccupation, let us say, with that aspect of life. So there we have the wish fulfillment dream, the wishes which people nourish, and some of which may not be that reputable, will manifest. The nightmare. Now the Artemidorus called that the vision, terrifying, and or the ordinary anxiety dream, which I think we all have quite often, is sort of a lesser level. But when the nightmare reaches very powerful dimensions, then we may be dealing with something deeper. And this is where Artemidorus and the ancients had something that they could compare the nightmare to, and that was the ordeal element of the mysteries. Because in the mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, Orphic mysteries, Dionysian, on and on, usually at some point there was one or there were more than one ordeals. In order to proceed further with the mystery, the person was confronted with something scary. Tries to progress in the dark, but all of a sudden you feel the point of a sword on your chest. And if I continue, I'll walk right into the sword. What shall I do? And so on and so forth. Therefore, Artemidorus says that often the inner man is undergoing his or her own mystery process and will present you with the nightmare. Actually, he says number of things. I guess people were subject to nightmares quite a bit in his days. But that, on the other hand, try to pay attention and see that perhaps something important is on its way of happening to you. But in order for it to happen, in order for it, as we would call it, not to be conscious, there has to be a nightmare. There has to be something terrifying. In order, which when you break through that, then you come to the Elysian fields and all kinds of beautiful and highly inspiring things. Because in the mysteries, which have been often called in the 19th century mystery schools, in the mysteries we experience both the light and the darkness of life, light and shadow. And so we should realize that we can learn from the shadow. Also the shadow, especially as it came to be then explained by Carl Jung, the shadow may contain certain elements of our mind, which are in the unconscious, which we need to incorporate. It calls unto itself. And so it calls unto itself by scaring us. Hey, here, pay attention. Halloween every day. Gives me a thought which I shouldn't express, but you know how I am. I often wonder, when we encounter cultural phenomena such as at the present time, when all the media and many of the politicians seem to just unload scary stuff on us every day. I mean, okay, we know that there is a bad situation, we know that we could die, although it's not very likely, all kinds of things. But do I have to hear about it all day long? And if I keep the radio on at night even, do I have to hear about it all night long? And never balanced by anything else, Do I have to wait till the election is over by the time the vaccine is released? All of these things. So I wonder whether there are all kinds of motives why people like to scare others. For instance, if there's a lot of scary stuff on television or on the computer or something, what is likely to happen? You're going to watch it. You're going to watch it because the scary stuff attracts you. Otherwise there would not be Halloween, there would not be horror movies, which I love. Stephen King would not be there, who is one of the writers whom I really admire. Or before him, Ernst Theodor Amadeus Hoffmann, the great German father of the scary stories and all the. It calls attention onto itself, and so something is trying to, by scaring you, something is trying to call attention. So pay attention. Maybe you learn something. Maybe you are led to some recognition of meaning that otherwise wouldn't have come to you. Don't think that a nightmare, and I am repeating what Jung actually wrote. He wrote some of his writings in English. The nightmare is usually not a female horse that appears after the dawn, or a mare at night. But I like ones no matter how stupid they are. And then, of course, I mentioned before the parapsychological dream, and with that I'm probably going to end in a minute. And what we really have here is the perceiving of events and places which upon later verification appear to be true. People, the people have dreams about something going on somewhere else. Number of them have been recorded when they happen to famous people. This is something that you always have to keep in mind, because when something happens to a famous person, the chances are it'll enter the books, and you can read about it later on. Something interesting happens to an ordinary Joe, the likelihood is that it will be forgotten. But there have been disclosures of people. I think one of the most frequent one that appears in the various books is that people are away from their usual habitat and somewhere in a distant location, and certainly before there was computer and all kinds of other ways, and they dream that something is happening in their house, such as there's a fire, house is burning down or almost, and then when they are able to, they can go and find out, and sure enough, it happened. Happened the same night when they dreamt about it, all kinds of things like that. In the lives of the saints, like Butler's Lives of the Saints, and whereas you find many of them. Because the people who were made saints very often were also quite close to the psyche. That's why they accomplished great things in religion, because they communicated with the inner life, and so they also would have experiences of this sort. And then, of course, and I probably mentioned that before, but I have quotations about all of these from Artemidorus. We have what he called the oracle, which is as he called it, simply since he was a pagan Greek, a revelation from a god. And this is what often has been called the big dream. So there are some dreams that are of such great archetypal power that they continue to reveal meaning to the dreamer on and on and on as you remember it. And that is what the Jungians nowadays call a big dream. And this is really the kind of dream that you should, it comes with 10,000 trumpets, as Jung said about the archetype. So you can't miss it, but you can repress it. You can try to forget about it, because again, some of it might not be all that present. But if you pay attention to it, as time goes on, I had, I think I mentioned last time, I had some, especially one when I was very, very small. I was 3 years old, according to my mother. I can get the picture of that dream with utmost quality right now if I want to, but that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be finishing my talk, you see. But it was of immense importance. It turned out to be of immense importance in my life. But let's put it this way too, so not to take the merit entirely away from myself, that I was early in life filled with the desire and the need to get meaning from the dream, to understand. And my father helped me with that a great deal. If I didn't have that, if my parents had been like a lot of parents are, oh, don't tell me about that stuff, that doesn't mean anything, come on, turn on the radio or something of that sort, then it probably wouldn't have happened. It's important early in life already to begin to pay attention to these matters. And if you do, then it becomes a habit. And it's a good habit, unlike all the bad habits that come before. And inasmuch as our time is up, but I promise you to tie it all up in a big Christmas ribbon next time, and it'll all be there. But let's say, I think this is the most important keynote for us to take home. Meaning is trying to come to us in life. And through all kinds of ways. And one of the ways in which it comes is the dream. And therefore we should pay attention to it. If our dream life is not very active, seek ways whereby you can stimulate your dreams. There are many, and there are a few that I can share with you later. There are ways in which you can talk to yourself and ask for a dream, and it'll come. So that it is really incumbent upon us to expect meaning to come to our lives and in our lives, and to call for it, and to appreciate it, and to try to utilize it. If we can do that to any marked extent in our lives, then we have really accomplished something. We accomplished much more than the people who have a great deal of money, or have a great deal of power, or whatever else people may seek, because this interior, ongoing, revelatory meaning is in many ways what really is supposed to take place in life. That is what is trying to happen. Jung called it individuation, you can call it by all kinds of means. And if we have an orientation, a positive orientation toward that, then various events in our lives, including the dream, are going to come to help that process. I'm sorry to cut the time short, but this way you can, even if you live a ways from here, you can get home and be still pleasing to the governor of California and to the mayor of Los Angeles. And I am sure that is among your deepest desires, to be pleasing to these gentlemen. So we are going to have to stop, and we will continue and finish up next time. Meanwhile, I brought with me, this is a little Navajo dream catcher. And when you have these, you hang them up near your bed or the bed of your children, and the bad dreams are going to be attracted to the center, so the Navajo say, and then dissipate, so they won't bother the dreamer anymore. But the good dreams will be there, and when you, so what you really have is a mandala structure adapted to the use of dreams. So if you want to see what it looks like, it'll be here, and I get some of these. I have some in my house. I get some of these from one of the Navajo schools that I occasionally send $1 to. So really very, very deserving institutions, usually run by Catholic fathers. But you know that in some of those schools, if they didn't have a cafeteria, and the children wouldn't have eaten anything that day. And that sort of thing is really very, very pitiful. So we should both actively and passively think about these things. Hidden away in the mountains of Montana and places like that, and very, very deserving people. So in any event, we will come to the dreams next week, and I'm very happy that you came, and we'll continue with it. Thank you so much.